Well, I've done a number of these services, and I haven't cried at one yet. But Kathy, I don't know. Anne wrote what I'm going to read, because I know that if she were up here, she would be crying. So this is what Anne wanted you to hear about her mom. Mom grew up in a close family with 6 children. The 4 girls, Mary Lou, Mom, Janet, and Nancy, shared a small bedroom with a bunk bed. She often laughingly told us that in the winter months, she had to walk to school in the snow, barefoot. Well, several years ago, when visiting her hometown of Gates Mills, Ohio, we discovered the school was right across the street. She was very close to her sisters, and one year, about 30 years ago, they all signed up for what Mom came to call Fat Camp. It was some kind of fitness week-long retreat thing. Mom told us that one of them, and we're not sure who, snuck candy bars into the camp. I think it was Mom, because she loved chocolate. She adored her father, and he called her Sis. They all loved baseball, and during the spring and summer, they'd all go to the school across the street and play baseball after dinner. And you all know that she was a huge Dodger fan. Dad was the one and only love of her life. I don't think she even dated anyone else. And I know she never loved anyone else. She loved her family and was a wonderful, devoted mom. We thought she'd be a member of the PTA forever. The 5 of us never knew her with dark hair. She always had that glorious crown of silver hair. She loved to laugh, and she was always the first one to laugh at herself. One time, when Dad was selling property up at Lake Tahoe, he awakened her from a nap and told her they needed to leave right away for the airport to catch their flight home. She quickly grabbed her coat and put on her boots. It wasn't until she was seated at the airport, waiting for the flight to board, that she noticed the woman across the aisle looking at her feet. She looked down and she realized her boots were on the wrong feet. So she very slowly and methodically crossed her ankles. She waited until her youngest child was well into school before she returned to work. Then she worked for Bronson Pharmaceuticals in La Cañada. She had a cuss can sitting on her desk, and anyone who said a bad word had to contribute to the cuss can. Some of the salesmen put in a couple of dollars before they even opened their mouths, just to cover them for the day. Little did she know that her bosses were saving that money, and when she retired, they bought her a gold bracelet with all they had collected. She was very frugal. When we'd go to the grocery store every week, she would always ask, as we walked out the door, "Do you have your coupons?" She never did get the online Vons for You thing, so I used to take along paper coupons in my hand. I don't think she ever bought anything that wasn't on sale. Years and years ago, she bought my dad this Valentine card. It's a frilly pop-up card, as you can see, and it cost her more than $1. Just to be sure she got her money's worth, she gave him the same card for every Valentine's Day for 40 years. And on the back, she wrote this: "This is the Valentine I gave to Pops every year for 40-some years. He said, 'You paid $1 for a Valentine?' So he got it every year." As frugal as she was also very generous. In later years, after she lost her eyesight, we'd sit at the table each month and we'd write out her checks. She always made sure the first checks that she wrote were her tithes for the church and for several charities she supported. If she knew a friend or family needed help, she was there. Mom was born into that generation that suffered through the Great Depression. I think it's also a generation that knows what it means to work. She used to ask me several times during the 11 years that we lived together, "What can I do for you now?" After her eyesight failed and she could no longer cook, we had to look for jobs for her. It was important that she feel like she was contributing to the household. So her jobs were to empty the dishwasher and fold laundry. Now, this isn't Ann's observation, this is mine. She was pretty good at folding laundry, except that my socks never did match. If we stepped in and did either of those jobs, we heard about it. She was also very determined. Just after she went into hospice care, she woke up on a Sunday morning and just seemed weary. So I told her I thought that we should stay home from church. A little later, she was up and moving around, so I changed my mind. But I didn't want to push her. I think she became frustrated with my indecision. After the stroke, she had difficulty putting sentences together. Now remember, this is Ann talking. She got right up in my face and said emphatically, "I want to go see the president." I said, "President Obama?" She looked at me like I was crazy. So I guessed, "Oh, you want to go to church?" "Yes," she said. I think she was talking about Pastor Bill. So, Pastor, don't be surprised if we start calling you Mr. President. Her determination got her to church on the Sunday before Thanksgiving this year. Each of the 2 nights prior to that Sunday, she had gotten up during the night and fallen. My sister Kathy and her husband Jerry were with us on that Sunday. My mom walked with them into church without a walker. She hated that walker. Part of the reason she wanted to be in church that Sunday was that I played the violin that day. The piece I played was an arrangement of the song, "Give Thanks." I used to download music for her to fall asleep to. In fact, the music that we heard today before the service started were a few of her favorites. I downloaded that arrangement of "Give Thanks" for her. In July, before the stroke happened, I tracked down the violinist on the CD, found out the music hadn't been published yet, and remarkably, he mailed me the music. She heard me play it for months, before and after the stroke in August, and she was going to hear me play it on that Sunday in church, no matter what. I knew it would be the last time she'd hear me play. The next day, she was unable to support herself, and through hospice, we ordered her a hospital bed. That piece is more than a beautiful arrangement. I realized, as I prepared and played it, that it was a theme of her life. I often told my siblings and the grandkids that she lived a life of gratitude and thankfulness. I don't think there was a day that went by when she didn't say, "Thank you," at some point. So as we planned this service, it only seemed right to center it around thankfulness. Her grandson, David, has put together a presentation with pictures of Mom, which we'll see at the end of the service, along with the accompaniment of that arrangement of the song, "Give Thanks." Mom, you've been more than a mom to me the past years. You've been my friend also. I was honored and privileged to be your daughter, your caretaker, and your friend for these past years. Now, before we start the message, which is the next thing on the program, I need to get a drink of water. I'll be right back. Thanks. Well, we're here to honor Amy, which isn't hard to do. She was a lovely and gracious and kind and giving person. And those of you who knew her can attest to that. And I know she'd like nothing better than after the service is over for all of you to join us downstairs with the family and to have a time of celebration with some cake and coffee and just reminisce about the good times that you had with Amy over the years. You've heard that Amy brought the family to church. And that's an interesting story because Amy was raised in a church back in Ohio. But even though she was raised in a church, she never felt a real connection to God. You know, a lot of people talk about man's search for God. I think C.S. Lewis got it right when he observed that that kind of attitude really is a bunch of bunk because it's like thinking that a mouse is searching for the cat. I don't think Amy was searching for God when she got married, and after the war, they moved here to La Cañada. But I think God was searching for her. And so, as she was sitting in the dentist chair one day in Montrose, her dentist suggested that she might want to find a church where her young family could be involved with the youth program. And he just happened to know about a church up on La Crescenta Avenue. And that's how Amy came to this church. And even though she found her Savior here at this church, actually it'd be more accurate to say he found her at the church, she never made a big deal out of it. She didn't wear her religion on her sleeve. She didn't have to, because her faith and hope in God was so deep and so authentic that it just became part of her life, and that it flowed out of her life into all of her relationships with her kids and with her grandkids, with her friends, even with someone like me. Talk about gracious. They let me join the family. Earlier in this time today, Pastor read Psalm 23, and I think that psalm really captures Amy's heart about God. And so I want us to think just for a few minutes about what the psalmist is saying, because I think Amy identified with it. Because the Lord is my shepherd, I have everything that I need. That was Amy's attitude about life. I never once heard her fret or express anxiety about not having something. If anybody exuded contentment with their circumstances in life, it was Amy. Even when things weren't going well, she always seemed to have this deep down confidence that God was going to take care of her and the family. And she was right. The psalmist goes on to say, He lets me rest in green meadows. He leads me beside peaceful streams. He renews my strength. He guides me along right paths, bringing honor to His name. In lots of ways, that characterized Amy's life here in the valley for so many years. But then the psalmist brings it home because he says, even when I walk through the darkest valley, I will not be afraid, because you are close beside me. You know, Amy walked through some dark valleys. She walked through some dark valleys when her husband Joe, the one love of her life, was dying from cancer. And then later, years afterwards, when she was living with us, she developed macular degeneration in her eyes. She began gradually to lose her eyesight. And so quite literally, she walked in darkness most of the last 6 or 7 years. And yet, she wasn't afraid. I never once heard her express fear or anxiety about where she was at in her life. Because, like the psalmist, she knew that God was close beside her, that He was there to protect and comfort her. Finally, the psalmist said, "Surely," speaking about God, "surely your goodness and unfailing love will pursue me all the days of my life." That was Amy's hope. That was her experience. Day by day, year after year, she knew that her God was pursuing her in mercy and love. And so if we really want to honor Amy and the impact she had on our lives, on your lives, let God pursue you. Let Him overtake you. Let God embrace you the way He embraced Amy. So that with Amy, you can also say, "I will live in the house of the Lord forever." C.S. Lewis, as many of you know, wrote a series of children's stories called The Chronicles of Narnia. The last story is called The Last Battle. And if C.S. Lewis were to put Amy into this story, this is what he would say. All of Amy's life in this world, all of her adventures in Gates Mills in Ohio, and in Corpus Christi, Texas during the war, and in La Cañada and La Crescenta, for some 90 years, all of those adventures were only the cover and the title page. Now at last, she was beginning chapter 1 of the great story which no one on earth has read, the story which goes on forever, in which every chapter is better than the one before. Even so, come, Lord Jesus.